I understand that the late Jim Handley, who lived in the village, killed a pig back in 1933, I understand. And he portioned up that pig and took it around on a pony and cart to different shops and sold the divided pig to different shops. And then that one pig became 2 pigs a week, became 3 pigs a week. Then he, over a period of time, it may have grown to maybe 20 pigs a week, and he had to employ people to help him. And slowly it was in that way that the whole thing took shape, and that, I understand, was the genesis of how a bacon factory came to exist in a place like Ruski.
Like everybody else around the village, I started as a summer worker. I would have started in 1989. That's what most of the kids done around here at that stage. It was either the local supermarket or the factory, and the factory was the biggest employer around at the time.
When I started working in the factory, there probably were about 100 people there. But over the years, and I'm talking about a long span of time, I mean, I spent 33 years of permanent employment there. At one time, the employment numbers exceeded 500. So a huge number of people. The factory contributed enormously to the economy. I certainly remember at the peak, perhaps in the order of €150,000 being spent every week on wages. Annualised, that's what, about 7.5 million being injected into a small village like Ruski and its environs. It's a huge amount of money.
I would say there'd be one person at least from every house in the surrounding 20-mile radius. I'd say there was people from every county in Connacht and a couple of counties in Leinster, maybe Westmeath, Longford. Plus you would have met people from every other county, you know, people that were delivering in pigs, people that were delivering food, supplies, sundries. So I would say there was people from every county in Ireland in that factory at some stage.
The fire happened in May of 2002. The fire actually broke out in a smoking area. It was actually where they smoked the meat. What happened was they used to use large chunks of timber, and it would be put into a press, and there was a wheel spinning on this machine, and the timber was pressed down onto the wheel, and as it done that, it created smoke, and that smoke was then pumped into the little room to smoke the meat, and that's apparently where the fire broke out. If you looked at the factory, you would have said, what the hell is there to burn in it? Simply because it was mostly, you know, steel tables, concrete, but what did take off, what did melt and what did burn was the polystyrene. It's like insulation that was built into the walls, but when you looked back in through the factory gate, you could see this insulation melting and just dropping down from the roof, and it was like liquid fire. That's all. The only way you could describe it was liquid fire.
I do remember hanging clothes on my line, and I saw this big black cloud over the village, and initially I thought it was a house that was on fire, but myself and my husband went down to the village, and lo and behold, this black smoke was coming from the factory, and there was just a huge crowd of people in the village because everyone had been evacuated from the factory. While the black smoke was going up in the air, you felt it was descending back down on the people.
I do remember the time of the fire, but I wasn't working in the factory at the time. I remember I was coming out of Longford one day. I seen this massive big cloud of black smoke. It was very near my house. As I got near, it's not my house, too big a smoke from my house, but as I got near and I realised it was the factory, and it was very badly in flames. But everyone thought at the time, look, it's a fire, they can put it out and maybe open it up in a week's time again, but that never happened, and it was a bad fire, and it was devastating for the village.
As the older generation, as my mum and dad's generation would say, do you remember where you were when JFK got shot? I remember where I was when the fire took place, you know. I had a little office unto myself, and I was up in the top corner of the Boning Hall. The Boning Hall was a large room. It could have been 200 foot by 300 or 400 foot. It was a huge room, huge big high ceiling in it. And I had a little office to myself up on the very top corner of it. But it was the type of place that, you know, it was soundproof, and your head would be down and you'd be working on these figures trying to get the calculations right for the management meeting. The first I knew about a fire was there was a phone call to the office, and it was the production manager, and he says, "Is everybody out?" And I says, "What are you talking about, is everybody out?" And he says, "There's a fire." "Jesus Christ, where's the fire? What are you talking about?" "There's a fire in the Bonin Hall," he says. And I looked up, and sure enough, the bloody fire was there. I was the last one out of the Bonin Hall, and as I was leaving the Bonin Hall, I looked back and I could see the wall shimmering with the heat from the far side, because the fire had actually started the far side.
I was off maternity leave. I had just had my daughter, and she was only 8 weeks old at the time, so I was here in the house. Eventually, phone calls started coming through from people. Had you heard it? Had you seen it? Have you found your other half that was in there? And racing down in a panic with babies and buggies and everything, trying to make sure that Michael was all right, and just being horrified, going down and seeing the amount of smoke and that, and the people standing around looking at the building in flames, and nobody knowing what to think or what to do.
The fire was certainly a great surprise. Obviously, it was devastating. At the time it happened, I guess nobody for a moment considered the seriousness of it or the lasting impact it would have on Ruski and on the people who then worked there. We all thought of it as a fire, okay, it'll be fixed, we'll all be back at work again in a short period of time and back to the normal, as it were. But of course, we then discovered that, you know, there was delay, and well, the rest is history.
Ruski had been a thriving village. It's not many villages that would have a factory employing 300 to 400 people. And there were many shops, there were pubs, there was a post office, there was a hotel. So it would be busy, and everybody made a good living while the factory was there. You walked through the village 10 years ago, you wouldn't, you know, put a pen between cars. They were so tightly parked. You walk through that village today and you could well be the only soul walking in the village. That is how devastating it was. There was great hopes that it would have been rebuilt bigger and better, because it was such a fabulous site. But unfortunately that didn't come to pass, and eventually the factory, you know, closed completely. But it was a nail in the coffin of that village.
And most people were just left in sort of a limbo. We all thought it was going to be rebuilt, because that was what we were being told, that it was going to be rebuilt. So we were kind of relieved at that. But then as time went on and we realised that it just wasn't going to be rebuilt, we were kind of devastated and then angry that we were just left out and nobody helped us and nobody rebuilt. Nobody was going to help us to rebuild. And it was not just rebuilding the factory, it was rebuilding our lives. Because every one of us that worked there had to now go out and find something else to do with our lives to try and make a living.
It meant all the jobs gone from around the place, plus all the shops, the supermarket, pubs, everything was suffering from the fact of the fire, you know, but that was it. There's nothing we can do about it now. 10 years ago, when everything was going well, when the tourists was going, the boats were flying up to Shannon and the factory was buzzing and everything was buzzing in Ruski, it was, I'd say, one of the best villages in Ireland. And now, it's a ghost town now. There's nothing in it now.
Well, I don't think that the community expected the impact to be so great. Everybody envisaged that, you know, things would get back to normal in 6 or 9 or 12 months' time after the fire. And then, you know, there was delay and counter-delay. And I think then slowly an awareness crept in that, gee, it's not going to happen. So there wasn't a lot we could do, only resign to the eventuality.
The demise of the village started with the fire. It really did, and it can be traced back to that. But since that, it's just one thing on top of another. It's the bypass, it's the economic downturn, and because of that, a number of pubs have closed. Because of that, our local petrol station has closed, our local hotel has closed. Now, talk to anybody that was in there at the time, and they would have told you, oh, this bloody place, we hate this place, and all that type of thing. Talk to those same people today, and it's a totally different story. You know, they didn't realise at the time what they had.
Nobody now has any reason to come to our village. It's a drive-through place now. You drive through it to go to someplace else. It's not a destination. People came here 10 or 15 years ago to holiday, to visit, because it had that lively atmosphere of a town that had something about it.
It's like a balloon that has been deflated. Do you know, 10 years ago the balloon would have been blown up to its maximum. Today the air has gone out of that balloon.
It's understandable. I mean, there was €150,000 approximately in wages, net wages, being handed out every week. As I said, that's about 7.5 million a year. When that's taken away completely, it has to have a devastating impact. And as I say, Ruski now, I mean, to say it's a ghost town doesn't do it justice. It's really sad.
Hopefully, you know, we said 10 years ago, we said, well, 10 years will make a big difference. Here we are 10 years later, it still has made no difference. We're hoping that 10 years down the road, it'll make a difference. And hopefully, eventually it will. It cannot keep on going the way it's going, you know. Eventually something will come into it, hopefully, you know.